Hello again. We're back with Counting Sheep by D.I. Jolly. And let's continue. Chapter 1. Dr. Clayton sat in his office, anxiously awaiting test results. In his mind, he prayed that he was wrong. He prayed that everything he had previously believed was in fact true, and he could return to his normal life. But he feared the worst. He knew that if his tests came back positive, it would prove without a doubt that the conspiracy theorists were right. In the moment he sat there waiting, the world seemed raw and dangerous, and hoping for the best seemed harder and harder. Rest was owned and run by a man named Jonathan Forsyth, a man who knew little about science, but almost everything about business. He'd come from money and from a young age showed that he knew how to make it grow. As a result, he was listed as the richest and possibly most influential man in the world. With the help of Doctors Clayton and Mitchell, Rest developed a small portable device they called a pillow that could hold approximately 3 nights of sleep. They also installed booths like ATMs all over the world where you could buy your sleep and recharge whenever you needed to. As a way of appeasing the focus groups, each night's sleep came with a small serial number attached that you could use online to find out about the person whose sleep you had bought, whether or not they were sick or in a natural coma, or if they were criminals. A few weeks earlier, Dr. Clayton had decided to disprove once and for all a few of the negative theories about the sleep banks. Taken at face value, everything seemed perfectly normal. But once he started digging, he started to discover that not all the information he wanted was available. He knew tests had been done in the past because he himself had ordered them and read them. But now he couldn't find the results to any of the follow-up tests. So he decided he'd redo them personally. The computer chimed with the arrival of the information he was waiting for, and his hopes fell dead upon the floor. Rest had always maintained that all people plugged into sleep banks slept dreamlessly. He'd believed this as a fact and defended it publicly. Tears ran down his face as he read over and over the results of the tests, which once and for all proved that his beliefs were a lie. Not only were people reaching dream state, but it seemed as though most of, if not all of them, were locked in a state of perpetual nightmares. Suddenly, the peaceful utopian sleep banks transformed into a hell-like torture chamber. He clapped both hands over his mouth, and his whole body tensed for a moment before falling to his knees, doubling over the wastebasket, and he threw up. Taking a few deep breaths, he picked himself up off the floor and staggered into his office bathroom to rinse out his mouth. The logical part of his mind knew that the underlying idea of sleep was still good and that something had gone wrong by mistake and that it wasn't being done maliciously. He wanted to tell himself that it was because no one else knew, but he couldn't help thinking that information that should have been there now wasn't, especially now that he had started looking. He knew it was the business side of it that had turned bad, and now he just wanted it all to end. Someone else knew, and it was being covered up. The whole idea of it had turned sour in his mind. He took a few minutes to compose himself and order his thoughts. He knew that he needed to try and bring a stop to it. It was up to him to bring his findings to the attention of Mr. Forsyth and Dr. Mitchell. He sat on his bathroom floor, trying to build up the courage to turn against every public statement he'd ever made about the residents of the sleep banks, and possibly cripple the company that had made him rich. Slowly, Dr. Clayton got to his feet and went back to his desk to print the information. While he was waiting, he told his secretary to call Dr. Mitchell and ask him to meet him in Mr. Forsyth's office. He stood staring at his printer, trying in vain to think of how he was going to explain his findings and what they were going to do about it. He picked up the printed pages, divided them and slipped them into a folder, then headed out towards Forsyth's office. In his mind, he'd already moved on from how he'd solved the problem to how he'd have to cut back personally in order to maintain a comfortable life for his wife and daughter. Rest would have to shut its doors, and who knows how long while they find a new way to gather sleep, which would reverse the company's cash flow. Also, an investigation would have to be launched into who knew and who had covered it up. He walked into the office and towards Forsyth's desk, where he expected to find both Mr. Forsyth and Dr. Mitchell waiting for him. Forsyth's office was the largest in the building. He'd wanted an entire floor to himself, but understood the implications of having an office that size. The room was double-story in height, and on the ceiling were a series of high-definition screens, which, with the help of a few cameras on the roof of the building, reflected the sky. 2 of the 4 walls were lined floor to ceiling with books, everything from business to fiction novels. Most of the floor space was taken up by full bookshelves, except for a clearing near the window where Mr. Forsyth kept his desk. Dr. Clayton always felt like he was walking through a library whenever he came into that office. It faced out over the downtown area of Sin Island's business district, and you could see all the way to the South Docks and the ocean. Despite the amazing view, Forsyth had his desk face towards the library, as he'd always found the company of books focused him. Dr. Clayton stood silent for a moment, then walked towards them holding out the files. "Gentlemen, I have extremely disturbing news." Both men quickly took and opened the files and started scanning through the documents. "I'm not sure how it happened, but it seems that people in the sleep banks are not only dreaming, but, based on the high levels of cortisol and adrenaline, it appears that they are perpetually suffering intense nightmares. We need to get involved and start waking these people up, and quickly." Mr. Forsyth put the file down on his desk and looked up at Dr. Clayton. "What prompted you to do these tests, Matthew?" Dr. Clayton slumped down in a chair. "I don't know. I suppose I wanted to be able to hold up proof to once and for all silence those bleeding hearts. I never expected to find anything. Lord knows how long it's been going on, or what changed from when we first did these tests 10 years ago." All right. Mr. Forsyth flicked a glance at Dr. Mitchell, who said, "So no one else has seen these test results?" A cold shiver shot down Dr. Clayton's spine, causing him to suddenly feel very vulnerable and alone. "No? Good." Mr. Forsyth's word struck him like a blow to the stomach. He quickly got to his feet, unsure if he should be angry or afraid. It was clear to him that neither Mr. Forsyth nor Dr. Mitchell seemed surprised at these findings. Anger took the lead. "Good? What do you mean, good? What could possibly be good about this situation?" Mr. Forsyth smiled, and in his best salesman voice said, "There's no reason to overreact here, Matthew. All I mean is that at this point, as long as no one else is aware of this, we can control the way the information is dealt with. There is a right way and a wrong way to proceed. The wrong way would be to simply run and tell the media we've been wrong all this time. You said yourself, we don't know how long this has been going on. Perhaps this is a new development. At this point, what we should be doing is conducting some more tests to find out if this is an isolated incident or when the problem began. Matthew slowly started backing towards the door. Don't give me that. Don't treat me like an idiot. You knew about this, didn't you? Both of you. I can see it in your faces. You're not surprised to find this out. How long have you two known? Mr. Forsyth glanced at Dr. Mitchell, who said, while slowly flanking Dr. Clayton, "Hey man, no need for accusation. How long?" Dr. Mitchell bolted to try and cut off the escape route. Dr. Clayton ran to intercept him, but was stopped by Mr. Forsyth's voice suddenly filling the room. "Sit down, Matthew!" He turned to look at Mr. Forsyth, who was on his feet and holding a gun. He stood still for a moment, then slowly walked back across the office and did as he was told. Dr. Mitchell nervously followed him. Mr. Forsyth lowered the gun, but didn't put it down. "Yes, we knew. We've known for about 3 years." The chemist contacted Dr. Mitchell and told him that it was possible that after long exposure to the anesthesia, a certain level of tolerance would develop. So we ran a few tests and sent him a very large check for his good work and told him not to get in touch again. Why wasn't I informed of this at the time? Because you would have done then what you want to do now. Try and pull the plug on the sleep banks instead of listening to reason. Listening to reason? What reason can you give me for trapping millions of people in a perpetual hell? Money. Lots and lots of money. Dr. Clayton dropped his face into his hands in disbelief and disgust, thinking, how could anyone be so shallow? Do you have any idea what will happen if we simply close the sleep banks? Have you stopped to consider the impact on the world we've created if we simply stop distributing sleep? Industry, the economy, education, it's all reinforced around sleep. It relies on sleep to function. If we simply cut the world off cold turkey, everything will grind to a halt. It's not just our bank accounts that will suffer. You're talking about potentially bankrupting the world. Dr. Mitchell put a reassuring hand on Dr. Clayton's shoulder. Matthew, you've got to understand, we've still changed the world for the better. Closing the banks isn't the answer. The whole world doesn't have to suffer just because of a few bad dreams. Anyway, even if we were to stop producing sleep, you know someone else will start, and they won't have as much empathy as you do. They won't care if people are suffering or not. We've already seen signs of that happening in poorer countries, with the people being forced into sleep banks, pumped full of any old drug that will knock them out, regardless of the consequences. At least if we do it, we know that we're trying to find a way to help people in the banks. Dr. Clayton looked up at Dr. Mitchell. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of a hard time trusting you right now, as you have a gun on me. But tell me again, how long did you say you discovered the people were developing a tolerance? A few years? A few years? And how long does it take for the people in the banks to build up this resistance? Approximately 1.5 to 2 years. And what exactly have you done in the way of finding a way to help these people, some of whom have been stuck in hell for 8 years? Dr. Mitchell threw a concerned look at Mr. Forsyth, who raised the gun and pulled the trigger. The impact of the shot knocked Dr. Clayton and his chair over backwards, and in a few moments, Dr. Matthew Clayton looked up at the ceiling, and in his last few moments, Dr. Matthew Clayton looked up at the ceiling and thought about how much he enjoyed watching sunsets and how much he was going to miss his daughter. In the distance, he could hear Dr. Mitchell's voice spilling out a string of profanities before the world slipped into darkness. And making headlines all over the world this Thursday afternoon, the shocking and sudden death of Dr. Matthew Clayton. Dr. Clayton was famous for co-creating the technology that brought about the sleep revelation and changing the developed world as we know it. We cut now to Dr. Declan Mitchell, the other half of the Sleep Project, as he makes his public statement from the front steps of the Rest Building. Yes, hello. It is with great sadness and regret that I can confirm that Dr. Clayton has in fact died due to a self-inflicted injury. John Forsyth and I were shocked to find him in his office in the early hours of this morning. We at Rest, and indeed the world, have lost a great mind, and I personally have lost one of my dearest friends. Dr. Clayton had recently received a number of letters and emails from anti-sleep focus groups. People seem to think that just because they see us on TV, that we are not real people, but more like characters in a show. Well, I think this will stand as a strong reminder that we are in fact real people with real lives and families. Dr. Clayton's widow and child will not be making statements, and I ask that they are left to grieve in peace. Before I start answering questions, I'll answer the obvious one. No, I do not believe that sleep drove Dr. Clayton to his dramatic actions. In fact, I can assure you that Dr. Clayton was a firm follower of getting natural sleep at least once a week. He used to say it was when he did his best work, dreaming up new ways to change lives. Dr. Mitchell turned his head away from the camera and microphone for a moment and rubbed his eyes before turning back again. Sorry about that. Are there any questions? Chapter 2. Next time. And remember, if you would like to read Counting Sheep and Other Stories for yourself, it is available in print, obviously, on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited on Amazon. Links in the video description below. Thank you.